Because if you're not, progressively overloading in your strength training and continuing to train hard, like these extra calories aren't going to do anything for you. And I think a lot of athletes are under fueling already. So if you're going to bulk, you got to really understand what your training demands are, and then make sure you're having enough calories for that.
Welcome to Iron Summit, where we cover topics about health, fitness, and general performance through the eyes of former elite Division I wrestlers.
We're live. We got to get the double screen so that you can see us both finger gunning. I got 3 questions for you, Max. 1, I got to talk about the elephant in the room. Who beat you up?
Oh, yeah. Black eye.
Yeah.
I been coaching high school wrestling, and these kids' heads just got me right in the corner of the eye. I didn't even notice it. And then I went home, and Alexis was like, "You have a black eye?" And I was like, "I do." It's not like a terrible one, but it's a little bit.
I always get them, just wrestling, you block with your face, and then you forget, like, the general population doesn't realize that. So I'm like, why is this person looking at me? We're in the grocery store. I'm like, yeah. Like, I don't know. It's just like normal, for wrestlers. Yeah. I feel like it's funny.
My ears are all messed up. I got black eye. Like, what's wrong with this guy?
This guy's a psycho.
Wrestling's super fun, though.
We love it. We love it. Yeah. Second bone to pick. Dude, I just want to start a petition. I just want it. What's the date? February 1st. All right.
Easy to
Starting
remember.
Today. Pants, no more. Like, we need to have ties at the top because I'm sick of these freaking pants. I can't find pants that fit my butt to hip ratio, and I'm sick of it. I need tie pants, and they need to be dressy.
Oh, I got the source for you. I've been fighting this battle my whole life.
Well, all right. Well, then what? So you've been gatekeeping this secret the whole time?
I didn't know you were struggling.
I'm just sick of it.
This plays well for our episode, which is bulking. But there's 2. I buy pants explicitly from 2 sources. One you probably already know, which is Lulu, and they have some decent options for big leg, little waist, big butt, little waist. But you could you'll go broke if you only buy Lululemon pants, and I usually have a rule, I try not to wear too many Lulu things at once because
I feel that.
Yeah, pushing it. You're towing a fine line. Although I've probably been looser with that rule lately. But the other source, and this is all my jeans, a lot of my dress pants, are from a place called Barbell Apparel, which are literally made for meatheads. And it actually works. I can buy my waist size, which is a 34, and it fits my legs and butt.
Okay, nice. That's good to know. I'll have to check that out.
Barbell Apparel.
Well, hey, I appreciate that. I don't know why you've been gatekeeping that so long, but thank you. I'll save my other question for next week. But let's get into it.
Now I really want to
build the suspense.
Let's do it. So, bulking. This is Ryan's favorite topic.
I actually love bulking because I feel like, I don't know, my whole life, I really haven't been able to, just straight up bulk because I was always in a weight class where it's you'd grow in the summer and stuff, but I was still competing. So it'd be you go up a weight class or 2. There was never you could gain an unlimited amount of weight. And I think recently it's been trying to put on some strength, some size, and it's tough. It gets to a point where you're eating a lot and then you're working out a lot. And I think there's a lot of tips that I think I've gotten from you, especially, that has helped with that. And I think it's a struggle. People don't realize, when you're trying to put on lean muscle tissue, it's actually really hard. It's easier to maintain something, but when you're actually building new muscle tissue, it's tough. And everybody wants to toe this fine line of not getting fat, but also putting on muscle. And it's you got to commit to the bulk. And I think that's kind of the theme of today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think couple things here. One is I made this my life. It was between it was actually like halfway through my freshman year at Lehigh. I decided I was going to go from 197 to heavyweight, but at that point, I was taking cutting really seriously. I was going to take all the knowledge that I had gleaned from cutting and working with nutritionists and apply it to bulking. And I really embraced that lifestyle. I went all in on the bulk. So I'm still all in. No, the clean bulk. It's you got to do it the right way. It's the hard way. But
I agree.
And you alluded to it. It's a lot more difficult than people think. Really changing your body, whether it's cutting weight or gaining weight, is really difficult because our bodies as humans, we want to maintain this state of homeostasis. Like that's kind of like our body's main goal at all points.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you're adding new muscle tissue, it's hard for a couple reasons. One is our bodies don't want to add muscle tissue because they think it's bad for survival, right? Like the more muscle you have, the more you have to eat. It's like against instinct. Like your body's hard programming doesn't want to do this. So you're fighting that. And then it's also your body's first kind of resource for adding weight is adding fat, because fat is safer. It's like energy store. From a survival perspective, fat is much more useful than muscle. So this whole process of adding muscle is difficult.
Absolutely. And like you got to convince your body kind of on that same thing of like muscle is super costly tissue. And so you got to like convince your body that like calories are abundant and you're going to be able to maintain this. And it's not like a scarcity mindset, which is, exactly. It's funny. The human body is it adapts so quickly and changes so much. And then I think one of the hardest part about bulking that's maybe not talked about enough is like the mental side of it. Because I know a lot of people that'll be like, hey, I want to put on muscle, I want to bulk. And then they do it for, 3-4 weeks. And then they're like, get a little fluffy and they're like, screw that, I'm cutting for a week. And then they kind of start just yo-yoing back and forth between like, I'm bulking, I'm cutting, I'm bulking, I'm cutting. Instead of putting in good time in the bulk, build the muscle, and then cut down when you need to cut down. And I think that you're just spinning your wheels, because if you're just lifting really hard and you're not giving yourself the nutrients to grow, you're never going to grow. And then if you try to give yourself the nutrients for a little bit and then you take it away right as your body's starting to grow, it's just super unproductive. And so I think keeping the mental side of it locked in, where you're like, I'm going to commit to this process and stay focused on this for the long-term vision, for the long goal. It's a productive bulk. And
exactly.
Yeah.
100% agree. Everything you just said. It's, yeah. So let's get into some kind of like practical tips and how to do it.
Yeah. I think number one, you got to focus on something else. Like focus on your strength numbers. And that's going to help you a lot more than focusing on like how you look in the mirror, because you might subjectively look bigger, when you're leaner, just because you can see your muscles better. So stop, looking in the mirror and thinking like, oh, I'm getting smaller from this, but my weight's going up. Track your numbers. If you're like, oh, I put 20 pounds on my bench, 20 pounds on my squat, then you're adding muscle tissue. And then number two, eat. Like we could end the episode there. You're going to have to eat. You can't outrun that. Like you got to get more calories in.
I totally agree. Here's maybe a little mental trick you can use to, if you're bulking, and I think this is kind of true. When you're bulking or you're really big and fluffy, better with clothes on, right? You just kind of look big.
Yeah.
Right. So just wear clothes all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just kidding. But like, that's like kind of how you look at it. You get big, you look good with your clothes on, and you'll look bigger like when you're walking around on the street than when you're like super shredded. But
dude, I think a great point to that is like, you look like you lift when you're in everyday clothes versus just looking like you lift when you're at the beach,
Yeah, exactly.
So
when you're bulking, you arguably it's more applicable to everyday life.
I think the other thing that's cool too is like, it allows maybe a little bit more flexibility in your lifestyle where it's like, yeah, I'm not saying totally abandon your nutrition plan. Like 100%, you should be trying to get most of your sources of food from like natural good sources, like whole food
Yeah.
sources. But at the same time, now you have a little bit more flexibility where, you go out with a friend and you get a burger. That's actually a lot more productive for you now than when you're trying to lose weight or trying to maintain for a certain, you maintain a weight class or something like that. So I think you get a little bit more of, you could have some lifestyle improvements as well around stuff like that with meals and whatnot.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely a benefit. It's not a, if you're doing it right and actually trying to add as much muscle tissue as possible and all that kind of stuff, you should be strict more often than not. But yeah, burger with your friends is actually arguably good, where you're cutting, it's just not really
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think the other thing too that is sometimes hard to, I think some people, it's maybe a little counterintuitive. Intuitive is like your protein's probably not changing much. It's like you're manipulating your carbs and fats, right? So like if you can add more carbs and fats, it's going to be a lot easier to bulk. Your body doesn't need, 500 grams of protein in a day. Typically I would say like a general rule is easy as like 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. But when you're bulking, you might get a little bit more just because you're eating more, maybe. But your extra carb or your extra calories should come from carbs and fats, and that's an easier way, especially fats. Just having more calories per gram, it's an easier way to get more calories, and it makes your life a lot easier than trying to eat just mountains and mountains of meat and
Yeah,
rice. Like you're gonna get full really quickly.
that's the hard way to do it. I think, and it's something to play around with. I mean, um, the general rule of thumb for like a good bowl, on the high side would be like a 20% caloric surplus. You're going to be really full if you're at
Yep.
20% caloric surplus, and you're going to be kind of pushing the upper limit on how much clean weight can actually put on. But that 10 to 20% range, depending on your goals, that's another thing. To your point of looking, if you stay in like a 7 to 10% caloric surplus and you're training really hard, you'll stay looking pretty good and be able
Yep.
to add some muscle tissue. It might take a little longer. Like if you're, can talk about this too, that depends on your timeline. If you're like I was in college, I was trying to get a whole weight class shift done in one summer because it's not possible to do that during the season. You got to go all in, right? You got to be 20, 30% caloric surplus. If you're just like general population and you're like, hey, I want to add muscle over the next year, stay in a slight surplus and just train really hard, and you'll kind of stay close to your the look you want to have. So with that said, though, 10 to 20% caloric surplus is a general good rule of thumb. And then to your point about carbs and fat, yeah, you don't change the protein a lot. Maybe eat a little bit more when you're in a bulk. It's not going to hurt you to eat 2 grams per pound. Like if you want to make sure you're covering your bases, go ahead. But really manipulate that carbs and fat and figure out what works better for you. Some people feel super high carb, lowish fat. Some people feel better with higher fat and lower carbs. I probably am a lean towards the higher fat, lower carb side of things.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point too, is like what works for you is huge in every aspect, whether you're bulking or cutting, and how you feel around that. I think the other thing too to bring up is like fiber's awesome and part of a healthy diet, but when you're trying to get a lot of food down, maybe you're not as, be mindful of the amount of fiber that you're having, because it's hard to eat a lot of food with a lot of fiber and not have your stomach just messed up and just super full all the time. And I think something that I heard once that I think has always helped me whenever I was trying to eat more, put on some weight, was if you can alternate, like if you're really struggling with food, it's easy to get liquid calories into. Like liquid calories don't keep you full as long. And like sometimes you're just like not that hungry, but you could slam a
Easier.
shake, you know? And I've never gone this far, but I've definitely seen bodybuilders like blend up chicken or a steak and drink it. And I think it's a little far, but like hey, whatever works. And I think, like whole milk and some protein powder or some oats or, you could throw a lot of calories into a shake where it's a 1,000 calorie shake, but it's not as filling
And
as eating, food.
to drink it, you don't have to sit there and chew it. And when that serious caloric surplus and you're sitting there just grinding through a meal, sometimes it's nice to just drink it.
Yeah.
So yeah, 100% agree. I mean, when I was in college and eating, I think I have to pull up my old diet. It was something ridiculous to get that weight class shift done in one summer. I was at like 6,700 calories.
Wow.
And it's just
Wow.
not possible to do with whole foods
Yeah.
for the whole thing. It was just, you can't do that. So there's an amount of liquid calories and and the amount of eating whole foods. But yeah, that's a great tip. Let's get into some, and to also your point around fiber, some of the foods that are best for clean bulking, outside of cheat meals.
Yeah. I think one thing and again, back to some of our previous videos, like red meat, this is where you get your ribeye, you get your fattier cuts of meat. This is an awesome time to do stuff like that because you're getting a lot more calories and it's awesome. Like that's a fun time to be. Maybe you're throwing some bacon in the morning with your breakfast or, get those fattier cuts of meat. It's an easy way to get additional calories in, where it's clean calories instead of just eating a bunch of cookies and, ice cream.
And healthy fats. Those are, contrary to popular belief, those are great healthy fats. Right now, now I'm training pretty hard, and for me to maintain my size, kind of right around 250, I'm eating like 4,600 calories a day, and I get that's with 150 grams of fat. Which, if you've never counted your macros, like that's a lot of fat to be getting in a day. So I have to eat like fatty meats to get all that fat in. And it's really enjoyable. Like 85, 15-gram beef is delicious. Like a cut of New York strip or ribeye has quite a bit of fat in it. But then you feel really when you're eating those kind of meats. So yeah, I think red meat is a great source of protein. Chicken thighs instead of chicken breasts. Like it's meats that have a little fat come with it. Salmon's one of the best if you can eat fish, but just add your meats. The next is rice. That's dense compared to other whole sources of carbohydrate. You look at like how much carbs you get from a cup of rice versus like a 10-ounce potato, and it's twice as much from a cup of rice. So those are easier to get.
It digests quickly too. Fruit juices too. I think like that's something. The funny thing too is like if you're trying to reverse engineer everything that we're saying here, like fruit juices are something like it's a really easy way to get a bunch of calories and a bunch of carbs quickly without like all the extra fiber. I think another, I don't know, I love peanut butter. Peanut butter is an awesome bulking item. And it's like, I don't know about you, but it's really easy for me to eat 500 calories of peanut butter like that. Like it's delicious and it's very nutrient dense.
It's easy for anyone. That's a good, good source of easy calories. 100%.
Absolutely.
And we've put it together before. All these things are put together at Costco. We call it a Gains cheat sheet. Costco's like the mecca of bulking, especially if you want to clean, if you buy the right stuff. Maybe, Ryan, we can link it to this episode, but we put together like what to look for at Costco, all the kind of cheat ways to get these cleaner but still tasty bulking food options.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's link that. And then also, one last thing I was thinking about too is like if you're really struggling to eat, like salting food helps you so much. Like there's a reason all these fast food restaurants put a bunch of salt in their food, and there's a bunch of it just makes it easier to get stuff down. So like if you're really struggling, make sure you're salting your food extra, and if you're not trying to eat as much, maybe do the opposite of that.
Yeah. Well, and also every food we just listed there, besides maybe fruit juice because it's so dense, is really good option if you're cutting weight. those are just healthy foods that are going to help you accomplish your goals. Maybe if you're cutting to less fatty meats and cut out the fruit juice, but you should we talked about, earlier, but when you're bulking and if you're trying to do this the right way, you should be eating a lot of the same stuff. That's just healthier options.
Yeah, absolutely. And cooking with more oils. I think that's just something else that maybe we didn't mention in there is like, hey, maybe put a little extra oil on your vegetables or cook your steak in more butter or, there's easy ways to get extra fats here that are healthy without, it's not like you're eating a crazy different amount of foods. It's a lot of the same foods. It's just being mindful of the quantity and then, adding little extra oils, fattier cuts of meat. And then I also think meal frequency, if you're really struggling with this, like if you're not a big eater, make sure that you're breaking these up a little bit so that you're eating multiple meals throughout the day. Because if you're trying to get, I don't know, you said 6,700 calories. I'm sure you weren't eating 3 square meals a day to get that, right?
A lot of meals, a lot of
Yeah.
meals throughout the day. Yeah. That's another huge thing with, eating for, bulking is, you should be, the longest you should go between meals is about 6 hours, but that's like it's every 2.5 to 3 hours you should be getting calories in.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. And then that kind of plays into the whole thing too with, you gotta plan this out, right? Like, I think your body, we talked about it earlier, your body wants that consistency. And so same thing on a bulk, like you get 20,000 calories one day and then 1,000 the next day. Like your body's not going to use that the same way that it would as if you are eating the same amount of calories every single day. So don't just like go crazy one day and then kind of cut your calories one day and go up and down and yo-yo with it. Consistently be eating here. And I think if you're really truly trying to bulk and put on muscle and optimize this, it'd be helpful to track your calories here. And kind of have a general idea of what you're eating and what types of, like how many grams of protein you're having, how many grams of fat, how many grams of carbs, and then understand how you're feeling and tweak as it goes with that. And then your body's also gonna adapt as you're doing this. So you need to weigh yourself. And once your weight starts stabilizing, you need to start adding even more calories because your metabolism will like adjust to this.
Yep.
You burn more calories and then you're like not bulking anymore. It's your maintenance calories now. Right. So continuing to adjust, and continuing to add calories as you stall. And you're not going to know when you're stalling, if you're not consistently tracking your weight, your caloric intake and all of that.
Yep. That's very true. And if you're adding new muscle tissue, you're going to be burning more calories just moving around, living, training. So you're going to have to be adding those calories in, as you said.
Yeah. And one more thing with the whole weighing yourself, I think try to do that a consistent time every single day. Like for me, when I was wrestling, this wasn't bulking, but it was same concept of like trying to understand what truly my weight is. You're going to have little fluctuations based on salt, water, fiber, how empty your,
how many carbs you're eating. Yeah. All this stuff.
But if I'm looking at my general, like every single morning after I go to the bathroom in my underwear, I check my weight at around, 6 o'clock, like then I can see a general trend over the week and understand if I'm going like up in weight or down in weight.
Yep. That's when I weigh every time, same time every morning. Cause then you understand. And if I'm a bigger guy, but if you're bulking, your weight's and you're eating a lot of food, your weight's going to fluctuate a lot throughout a day.
Yeah.
I fluctuate probably up to 10. I'm usually 10 pounds heavier at night.
Wow.
Than I am in the morning.
Yeah. That's a crazy set.
Yeah. That's a lot. It's up and down based on hydration, and it probably peaks like mid-afternoon because I start drinking a little less fluid as I head into bedtime. But yeah, you'll be 10 pounds up.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think that the other thing, lifting is so important here, right? Like if you're just eating a bunch of calories and just sitting on the couch, you're going to get fat. Like it's
a different kind of bulk. Yeah. Different bulk.
So use these calories, right? Like train hard with this and make sure that your training is on point while you're doing while you're adding calories. Because if you're not, progressively overloading in your strength training and continuing to train hard, like these extra calories aren't going to do anything for you. Um, and I think a lot of athletes are under fueling already. So if you're going to bulk, you got to really understand what your training demands are, and then make sure having enough calories for that. And then on top of that, your extra 10% of calories or whatever you're deciding your point needs to be for your bulk.
Yep. That is a huge aspect. If maybe, maybe the most important thing we can say here is train while you're bulking. And then the kind of training you're doing is important. If you're in a caloric surplus and you're training hard, you're going to put on muscle tissue. There's a reason like CrossFitters are jacked. They're doing a ton of cardio and metabolic training, but they're still pretty built. But if you're if you're a college wrestler, we'll use that example again, and you're in between, seasons and you're trying to do this as efficiently and quickly as possible, you should be focusing on hypertrophy and driving that stimulus. But if you're, preparing for a powerlifting meet and trying to put on a little bit of muscle and you want to eat in a caloric surplus and, you're going to put on muscle mass. It's just the way our bodies work. If you're getting in that hard training, you're going to put on the muscle mass if you combine it with a good, healthy caloric surplus. Also really important around training is the timing of your meals. The most important, I like this quote. My coach told me this, my powerlifting coach, Coach Adam Miller, I'll give him a shout out, but your most important pre-workout meal is your last post-workout meal. So what you eat, that doesn't have to be right after, but within 2 hours of your training is the most important meal you can eat when you're trying to add tissue. That should be your heaviest meal in terms of calories by a significant amount.
Yeah. No, I think that's super important. And like, especially that becomes even more important if you are training multiple times a day. I'm not saying you have to train multiple times a day, but a lot of a lot of athletes are. And so your recovery starts the second that workout ends. So not just like the gym bro, anabolic window, let me get jacked. It's like, let me start my recovery process so that I can go and work out harder in the future. And I think that's that's why people take PEDs. They recover better. Like your recovery is your biggest thing. It's not your ability to train hard. It's your ability to recover so that you can train hard again.
100%. And that's actually a really good point. I'm glad you mentioned that, because the most important thing for adding new muscle tissue is recovery. Everything we've talked about to this point is just how you're going to help your recovery, being in that good, healthy caloric surplus, getting in enough protein, figuring out how to fill in the rest of those calories between carbs and fats, training really hard. The most important thing is your recovery. The lot of calories is going to drive that recovery. But if you're trying to do this as efficiently as possible, you should probably be prioritizing your lifts and then your recovery around those lifts. Also huge with bulking and adding new muscle tissue is sleep and getting consistent sleep. That is probably the most underrated ingredient here. If you're eating a ton of food and training really hard, but then sleeping like trash, you're not going to efficiently add new muscle tissue. This is something we got to, like we talked about at the beginning of the episode, you got to make your body feel safe to do this. So you got to get everything right. You got to be training hard. That's like convincing your body, oh gosh, I need more muscle tissue. Look at all this stimulus, I'm getting. I need to adapt to all these weights I have to lift. Then you're giving your body the fuel to grow that new muscle tissue through the food. And then sleeping is, you're putting it all together. You're giving your body the time and the rest it needs to actually grow the new tissue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that too, like you said, sleep's important, super important. And then also, manage your stress, right? Like you're putting a lot of stress on your body when you're trying to add muscle tissue. So it's probably not a great idea to do this. Like when you're really stressed with if you have a huge, I don't know, huge life event going on, a bunch of tests or, work or whatever's going on in your life too. Um, Make sure you're managing your stress too, to your best ability. Stuff comes up. But it's all part of it. And yeah, you only get so much out of it if you can recover and feel better after. If your body is constantly in this inflamed state, it's really hard to put on this muscle. Your body's just like attacking itself.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, like hypertrophy, new muscle, that it is an inflamed state in and of itself. So if you're adding to that, you're setting yourself back. Also to that point, we should probably start. This is not for our athlete listeners, for wrestlers. This is not something to do in season unless it's like a must, because it's just with the amount of training you have to do as an in-season athlete, you're really going to be fighting an uphill battle to add muscle tissue.
Absolutely. And I think that goes to a big point here too, where it's like, you got to prioritize what your goal is. In season, your goal is performance. It's not adding size. And then when your goal is to add size, there's other levers you need to turn down too. Like maybe you're not running a bunch when you're trying to put on weight, because that's counterproductive to your main goal. So be really clear about what your main goal is before you decide to bulk. If you're like, I want to get stronger, I want to get bigger muscles, but I don't want to get fat. It's like, well, you're going to have to pick one and prioritize for it, because you're going to probably put on some more fat tissues if you're going to put on muscle tissue. It's just like, you can't just build muscle without having the calories to build the muscle. But if you're like, hey, I want to get stronger, but I don't want to put on fat, like you got to pick one. You can't just like, you can't change both levers without being detrimental to another lever. So be really clear about your priorities before you commit to doing something like this. And that's for cutting weight too. Like if you're like, I want to hit a 500-pound bench, but I want to lose weight. Like those are conflicting goals.
Yeah. I mean, like I get asked good amount, like I want to get bigger, but I want to get leaner too. I'm like, well,
Good luck. So does everything.
Yeah. Unless you're willing to do like some really hardcore anabolic steroids that are just terrible for your health, it's not going to happen. Like pick one and then do the other, but you can't do both at the same time.
I think it's such a good philosophy, honestly, for life too, man. I struggle with that a lot too. It's like, you can only do so many things. You can't spin 100 plates. So you got to be really good at prioritizing and saying no to things that you kind of want to say yes to the things you really want. And so if you're going to commit to it, but understand what you're saying no to as well. And then be ready for that, because it's staying consistent throughout all of this that's going to make this successful. And not constantly changing your mind and going random directions all the time with your training, with your calories, with your goals.
Yep. I agree with that. I think that's a good place to end. I would just kind of summarize it by saying, for adding mass, prioritize your recovery, make sure you're training hard, maybe prioritize hypertrophy, add that, make sure you're in that caloric surplus, figure out which kind of caloric surplus works best for you, whether it's more carb or more fat dependent, and get your sleep.
Heck yeah. I love it. Butts and guts 2024. Let's do it.